there, everyone. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, if you're an Eagles fan and you're still recovering from the loss to the 49ers, I don't blame you. It was a tough loss, and Eagles fans have every right to be disappointed in the team. But looking forward to Week 14, the Eagles do have an opportunity to clinch a playoff berth again this week. Now, just like last week, it would not be the Eagles alone needing to contribute here. The Eagles would need to defeat or tie the Dallas Cowboys, and they would also need some help from elsewhere in the league.
Gun knuckles for 8! And Rohan will answer.
Now, there are a number of situations that the NFL laid out for how the Eagles can clinch this week, but it all boils down to just a handful of teams, and they're very similar teams to the teams that needed to contribute last week. So while later on this week we will take a look at the Eagles matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, as is our custom here at the Bird's Nest Podcast, we will take a look at this episode and see where is the help most likely to come from, if the help is going to come at all. Now, just like last week, there is no scenario that the NFL laid out on Tuesday afternoon that involves the Eagles clinching a playoff spot if they lose. The Eagles do have to defeat the Dallas Cowboys or have to tie the Dallas Cowboys, but obviously the most straightforward path would be if the Philadelphia Eagles defeat the Dallas Cowboys. Then they don't need nearly as much help. Either the San Francisco 49ers would need to defeat the Seattle Seahawks, or the Baltimore Ravens would need to defeat the Los Angeles Rams. Now, as I take a look at these scenarios, while it is very, very likely that the help could come from either or both of these two teams, I think it is more likely to come from the 49ers defeating the Seattle Seahawks than it's going to be from the Baltimore Ravens to defeat the Los Angeles Rams. And I think that's a very slight difference. We saw how the 49ers were able to manhandle the Philadelphia Eagles through 3 of the 4 quarters. And the Seahawks are a much worse team. The 49ers are 9-3 on the season, the Seahawks are 6-6. And the Seahawks are on a 3-game losing streak right now, and they lost a very close game to the Dallas Cowboys last week. A game during which the Dallas Cowboys had to play from behind for most of the game. And the Seahawks and the 49ers, being division rivals, already faced off earlier this season. Actually, a couple of weeks ago. The Seattle Seahawks were blown out by the 49ers 31-13. The 49ers were able to put up 377 total offensive yards on the Seahawks, and the Seahawks turned the ball over a couple of times. And the 49ers are at home this week against the Seattle Seahawks, so it's much less likely for the Seahawks to win in Levi's Stadium than it's going to be for them to win in their own stadium. In fact, the Seahawks this season are 2-4 when they are the away team. Now, the only thing that gives me pause about this game is the fact that it is a divisional game. And sometimes games between divisional rivals can be a little bit weird. The frequency in which you face these teams can sometimes mean that a team that should lose might actually win. But what tempers that concern for me is the fact that the Seahawks have already faced all of their division rivals at least once this season. And their only divisional win so far has come when they were playing at home against the Arizona Cardinals, who have been vying for the number 1 draft pick in next season's draft. So as much as it pains me to say it as an Eagles fan who's still recovering from the loss to the 49ers this past Sunday, I do think that it is more likely for the Seahawks to lose to the 49ers than it's going to be for the Rams to lose to the Ravens. Now, that having been said, the Rams losing to the Ravens is still a very likely scenario. The 9-3 Ravens are atop the NFC North. It's a highly competitive division. The Ravens have handily defeated some of the most powerhouse teams in the league right now, and they've defeated the overwhelming majority of their opponents by 2 scores or more. So it is very likely for this Ravens team to be able to dominate a 6-6 Rams team. Now, why do I think the Rams are less likely to lose to the Baltimore Ravens? Well, it comes from their recent performance. The 6-6 Rams surprised everybody last week, defeating the Cleveland Browns. Now, it was against Joe Flacco last week, but Matthew Stafford coming off of injury And here I am thinking that the Los Angeles Rams were the most likely team to give us help last week. The Los Angeles Rams manhandled the Cleveland Browns 36 to 19. And the Rams are on a 3-game win streak right now. They've defeated the Seahawks, they've defeated the Cardinals, and then they've defeated the Browns. So they are on a little bit of a hot streak right now. But at the end of the day, I do think that the Rams win streak will end at 3, and I think that the Baltimore Ravens will defeat the Rams, and the Rams will get us the help that we need through their losing to the Ravens. Now, the good news is we only need one of those two NFC West teams to lose. But what happens if they both win? What happens if they both surprise us and pull off the upset? Well, then the help is going to have to come from the NFC North, just like last week. The New York Giants would have to defeat the Green Bay Packers. If that happens, then either the Detroit Lions would have to lose their matchup against the Chicago Bears, or the Vikings would have to lose or tie in their matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, I lay it out like it's simple, but when you actually look at it, you realize very quickly help isn't coming from the NFC North. As I just said, the Packers are taking on the New York Giants, and the Packers just upset the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. Jordan Love had 3 touchdowns against the Chiefs defense. The Packers also had an interception. They were able to sack Mahomes 3 times, and they have had 3 straight wins over the course of the last 3 weeks over the Chargers, Lions, and Chiefs, and are 6-6 on the season. The Giants, meanwhile, they're on life support. They are 4-8 on the season. Their only wins have come against the Commanders twice, the Patriots, and the Cardinals. And I wouldn't necessarily call them elite teams or teams that are in the playoff mix right now. In addition, their most dominating win was the second matchup against the Commanders, where they won 31 to 19. Everything else has been within 1 touchdown or less. Now, the Giants are coming off of the bye week, so they will be rested, and that could throw a wrench into plans here. And they are at home, so the home record is slightly better. They are 500 at home versus 2-5 away. But I don't see a scenario at this point where the New York Giants are likely to defeat the Green Bay Packers. But what happens if they do pull off the upset? Well, then we would need one of the other NFC North teams that's vying for a playoff spot to lose. We'll start by taking a look at the Detroit Lions, who are facing off against the Chicago Bears. And the 9-3 Lions held on for a victory in a wild finish against the New Orleans Saints. The Lions held a 24-7 lead at halftime, but they allowed 3 touchdowns in the second half of that game to the Saints. And it was definitely concerning for Lions fans as they got through to the end of that game. Now, the Lions did hold on for a victory there, but the truth of the matter is the Bears should give them a whole lot less trouble. The Bears are 4-8 on the season, and they are coming off of the bye. They did go into the bye by defeating the Minnesota Vikings, another divisional rival of theirs, by a final score of 12-10. And before that, they actually lost to the Detroit Lions 31-26. So the Detroit Lions have already defeated the Chicago Bears. And while, yes, this is going to be a divisional matchup, and yes, the Bears are at home, I don't think that the Detroit Lions have anything to be super concerned about, other than the fact that it's a divisional game and sometimes there can be some weirdness thrown into that. So, despite the fact that the Bears are coming off of the bye, despite the fact that it's a divisional matchup, despite the fact that the Bears are playing at home this time, I do think the Lions are going to come away with the win. So let's also take a look at the Minnesota Vikings, who are going to face the Las Vegas Raiders. The Vikings are 6-6 and the Raiders are 5-7. So record-wise, these are two very similar teams. The Vikings are on a 2-game losing streak right now. They've lost to the Broncos and the Bears. But there were more penalties in the Bears matchup than there were Vikings points. The Vikings scored 10 points against the Bears, and the refs threw 11 penalties. They're a very meh kind of team right now. And they're facing off against another very meh kind of team right now in the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders have defeated the Broncos, Packers, Patriots, Giants, and Jets. Those are their 5 wins. The Vikings have faced off against many of these same teams, and the Vikings have lost to more than a handful of them. In addition, the Raiders are 4-2 at Allegiant Stadium this season, and that's where the game's going to be played. Both teams are coming off of the bye this week, so the bye is not going to help either team. And I do see this game going either way, but I am leaning right now ever so slightly toward the Minnesota Vikings, just based off of their current record and just how their season's going. Now, all of these scenarios presume that the Eagles win in their matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. But what happens if they tie the Dallas Cowboys? Well, they're going to need a lot more help. But fortunately, there are no other teams that enter the mix like there were last week. The Seahawks and the Rams would both need to lose. The Vikings and the Packers would both need to lose. And finally, the most complicated of the scenarios would be for either the Rams or the Seahawks to lose outright, and then the Vikings or the Packers to lose or tie in their matchups. So looking at all this, looking at all these teams and the most likely places that the help is going to come from, I think it's going to be the Seahawks first, then the Rams, then the Vikings, then the Lions, then the Packers. So I think the most likely scenario for the Eagles to clinch a playoff berth this week would be for the Eagles to defeat the Dallas Cowboys and then the Seattle Seahawks to lose to the San Francisco 49ers or tie them. And as much as it pains me to say that as an Eagles fan who just had the 49ers demolish us in our matchup on Sunday, I do think that is the most likely scenario. The next most likely scenario, not by much, but enough to make it the next most likely, would be for the Eagles to defeat the Dallas Cowboys and then the Los Angeles Rams to lose or tie in their matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. So that's my analysis as I take a look at these playoff scenarios, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Where do you think the help is going to come from in the Eagles' playoff chances this week? Let me know. And thank you so much to everybody for tuning in to the Bird's Nest Podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest Podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Amazon Podcasts, and Spotify. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles coverage. And if you feel so inclined to support us in a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon in the description below or at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles.